Chapter 16. Corky leapt to her feet, staring straight ahead through the darkness as the creature struggled to rise into the room. Her mouth in horror, Kimmy grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the hole in the floor. The creature whimpered and scratched at the floorboards. "It's a dog!" Corky cried. Deborah's face fell. Corky and Kimmy rushed forward and worked to pull the dog out of the hole in the floor. "You smelly thing," Kimmy said, petting its head and scratching its ears. "How did you get stuck down there?" The dog, a forlorn-looking mutt with damp tangles of long brown fur, licked Kimmy's nose appreciatively. "Don't let him lick you, Kimmy," Corky teased. "You don't know where he's been." "A dog? I don't believe it," Deborah said, sighing. Wagging its shaggy tail, the dog circled the room excitedly, sniffing furiously along the floor. "Well, maybe he smells the evil spirit," Kimmy said sarcastically to Deborah. "Not funny," Deborah muttered, gathering up the candles. "I really thought we were close to something." "Me too," Corky said, watching the dog as it loped out of the room. "I was so scared when we heard the thing start to come up from the floorboards." "Bow wow," Kimmy said dryly, rolling her eyes. "I'm not giving up," Deborah insisted. "I am," Kimmy said emphatically. "I'm freezing." She handed the flashlight back to Corky and started toward the front door. "Kimmy, wait," Corky called. "Want to come to my house?" Kimmy turned back and shook her head. "No thanks. I'm going home and getting into a hot bath." "But—" "Let her go," Deborah said glumly. "See you in school tomorrow," Kimmy called from the front entryway, then disappeared from view. Corky turned back to Deborah, who slammed her book shut and tucked it under her arm. "I was so psyched," she told Corky. "So psyched." "Me too," Corky said. "We're the only ones who know the evil spirit is loose," Deborah said, heading to the front. "The only ones?" "Yeah, you're right," Corky agreed sadly. "My own parents change the subject every time I try to tell them the truth." "That's why we have to do something," Deborah said. "I just keep thinking about Sarah Beth Plummer and John Daly," Corky said with a shudder. She pulled up the collar of her down coat and buried her face inside it like a turtle as she followed Deborah to the door. They stepped outside, surprised to find it warmer there than in the house. "Yeah, that sounded like a pretty bizarre scene, the two of them in the cemetery," Deborah said thoughtfully. Her expression brightened. "You know what? We should check them out." "You mean go talk to them?" Corky asked, following her toward the street. Deborah nodded. "Yeah?" "Right now?" Corky asked, glancing at her watch. It was nearly 10. "Why not?" Deborah asked. "Well," Corky hesitated. That nice hot bath that Kimmy had talked about seemed pretty good to her, too. "Come on, we'll take my car," Deborah urged, pulling Corky by the arm. "It'll only take a few minutes to drive to John Daly's house." "Yeah, but what do we say when we get there?" Corky asked. "We can't just barge in and say, 'John, what were you and Sarah Beth Plummer doing in the cemetery the other night?'" "Why not?" Deborah said. She pulled open the back door to her car and dumped the candles and book on the seat. "That's exactly what we'll ask." She tossed back her hood and brushed her sleek short hair with one hand. "Come on, Corky, get in." Corky hesitated for a long moment, then pulled open the passenger door and climbed in. Deborah slid into the driver's seat and rested her hands on top of the steering wheel. The glow of the streetlight fell over Deborah's pale, slender hand, and Corky thought of Chip's hand, lying forlornly beside the power saw. She saw the hand, severed neatly at the wrist, and then the puddles of dark blood, and then Chip lying face down in his own blood. "Corky, what's the matter?" Deborah cried, seeing Corky's horror-filled expression. Corky shut her eyes tight, erasing the picture. "Let's go see John Daly," Corky said, her voice a dry whisper. The Dalys lived in the wealthy section of Shadyside known as North Hills, a few blocks from the high school. Deborah pulled up the driveway to the house, a sprawling redwood ranch-style house behind a neatly trimmed front lawn. At the end of the drive, the garage door was open. A Volvo station wagon was parked inside. 2 bikes hung on the wall. Corky wondered if one of them had belonged to Jennifer. So much death, she thought, climbing out of the car. The evil has claimed so many victims. She and Deborah walked side by side up the flagstone walk to the front door. Deborah raised her finger to the doorbell, then hesitated. "Go ahead," Corky urged. "We're here. We might as well talk to John." Deborah rang. They heard voices inside the house, then approaching footsteps. The porch light went on. The front door was pulled open. Mrs. Daly's head appeared in a rectangle of yellow light, her expression quickly turning to surprise. "Why, hello, girls." Her faded blonde hair was wrapped in a red bandana. Her features seemed to melt together in the harsh light. "Hi, Mrs. Daly," Corky said, clearing her throat. Remember me? I'm Bobby's sister? Of course, Mrs. Daly replied, eyeing Deborah. We came to see John, Corky said. Mrs. Daly's mouth dropped open. Who is it? Mr. Daly's voice floated out from the living room. Do you have news about John? Mrs. Daly asked Corky, ignoring her husband's question. Huh? Corky couldn't hide her confusion. News? Who is it? Mr. Daly said again as he appeared behind his wife. He was tall and balding. He had on a Chicago Cubs t-shirt and straight-leg corduroys. His forehead was furrowed. The house smelled of stale cigarette smoke. They have news about John, Mrs. Daly told her husband. She gripped his hand. No, Corky corrected. We came to see John. We need to talk to him, Deborah added, self-consciously adjusting her cape. Oh. Mrs. Daly's face fell. The light faded from her eyes. John isn't here, Mr. Daly said sternly. We're worried sick about him, Mrs. Daly added, gripping her husband's hand. It's been 2 days. 2 days. We called the police. Huh? The police? Corky glanced at Deborah, who looked as startled as she did. Mr. Daly nodded sadly. Yes, John disappeared 2 days ago. We don't know what happened to him. Chapter 17. After dinner the next night, Corky waited for Deborah at Alma's, the small coffee shop where she and Chip had talked to Sarah Beth Plummer. The restaurant was bustling now, the booths and long counter filled with college students, laughing and talking, their voices competing with the clatter of silverware and china and the saxophones of the salsa band pouring out from the jukebox. Deborah came hurrying in 10 minutes late, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She was wearing several layers of sweaters over blue corduroys. Her eye swept over the crowded restaurant until she located Corky in the next to last booth. After making her way past a white uniformed waitress holding a tray of glasses over her head, Deborah slid into the booth across from Corky and sighed. Sorry, I'm late? No problem. Where's Kimmy? She's sick, Deborah announced. Her mom says she has a temperature and everything. That's why she wasn't in school today. Corky's mouth dropped open in surprise. Sick? Will she be okay for the game tomorrow night? Deborah shrugged. I hope so. The waitress appeared, pad in hand, and stared down impatiently at Deborah. You need a menu. Deborah shook her head. Just a Coke, please? Sarah Beth Plummer lives right across the street, Corky said after the waitress left. She pointed out the house to Chip and me that night. We sat over there. She indicated the rear booth, and she told us about Sarah Fear. Deborah glanced at the booth Corky had pointed to. It was now occupied by 4 girls having hamburgers and french fries. You think this Sarah Beth will be helpful? Corky sipped her hot chocolate. She made a face. It tasted powdery. It hadn't been stirred enough. I just had the feeling that night that Sarah Beth knew a lot more than she was telling us. There was something suspicious about her, something devious. Deborah's Coke arrived. She picked up the straw and blew the paper covering at Corky. This Sarah Beth Plummer, is she old? Corky shook her head. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from her eyes. No, she's young, early 20s, I think. What makes you think she'll talk to us? Deborah asked. I don't know, Corky replied, but I think we have to try to talk to her. I saw her dancing over Sarah Fear's grave with John Daly, and now John has disappeared. Do you think Sarah Beth knows where the evil spirit is? Deborah asked, sipping the Coke. I intend to ask her, Corky replied, and sighed. This is a crazy conversation, isn't it? If anyone overheard us, they'd think we were nuts. But we're not nuts, Deborah said quickly, gesturing with both hands, accidentally bumping her glass and spilling a small puddle of Coke onto the tabletop. The evil is real, we know that. I know, Corky agreed quietly. Let's go see what Sarah Beth Plummer knows, Deborah said. Both girls slid out of the booth and, after paying, hurried out of the restaurant. There was no name over the doorbell, but Corky remembered the house. It was a narrow, 2-story, semi-detached red brick structure, part of a row of small houses, most of them occupied by students from the nearby community college. The 2 girls hesitated on the small concrete front stoop, staring at the curtained window beside the door. Corky raised her finger to the doorbell, then lowered it. What's the matter? Deborah asked in a loud whisper. A car rolled by quickly, its headlights sending a wash of white light over them, fixing them in a bright spot. I just keep picturing Sarah Beth dancing in the cemetery, Corky replied, with John leaning over Sarah Fear's grave. She gripped the sleeve of Deborah's sweater. She could be dangerous, Deborah. She could be possessed by the evil. Corky shuddered. We could be walking into our death. We have to find out, Deborah said in a tense whisper. We've got to know the truth. Taking a deep breath, she reached forward and pressed the doorbell, leaving her finger on it for a long time. They could hear the buzzer inside the house. A light went on. They heard soft footsteps. Then the door was pulled open. Sarah Beth Plummer poked her head out. She had a bath towel wrapped around her hair. She must have just washed it, Corky realized. Sarah Beth's eyes fell on Deborah first. Then she recognized Corky. "Oh, hi." Her expression was a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Hi, remember me?" Corky asked meekly. "Yes, you're Corky," Sarah Beth said after some hesitation. "This is my friend, Deborah Curran," Corky said. Come in, Sarah Beth said, shivering. "It's freezing out, and I just shampooed my hair." The two girls followed her into a small living room filled with antique furniture. Corky carefully closed the front door behind her. The room was hot and smelled of oranges. Two old, oversized armchairs and a large, plum-covered couch nearly filled the space. A low coffee table in front of the couch was stacked high with books, papers, and files. The walls were lined with crowded bookshelves that reached nearly to the ceiling. Sarah Beth rewrapped the towel on her head, staring at the two girls. She was wearing an oversized man's white shirt over black leggings and woolly white tube socks. "Can we talk with you?" Corky asked awkwardly. "I mean, is this a bad time or anything?" "No, I guess not," Sarah Beth replied, her expression still confused. "I was just making some coffee. Would you care for some?" "No thanks," Deborah answered quickly. "Take off your coat," Sarah Beth told Corky. "You can just toss it over there." She pointed to one of the armchairs. "I thought, well, maybe you could tell us more about Sarah Fear," Corky stammered, obediently tossing her coat onto the back of one of the big chairs. Sarah Beth's mouth formed an O of surprise. "If it isn't too much trouble," Corky added. "Sarah Fear," Sarah Beth said, eyeing both girls thoughtfully. "Well, it would really mean a lot to us," Deborah said. "Anything you know about her?" "Okay," Sarah Beth reluctantly agreed. "I mean, I don't know that much, but sit down." She gestured to the couch. "I'll just go turn off the stove. Then we can talk. I'll tell you what little I know." "Thanks a lot," Corky replied gratefully. "I know we're barging in." "No problem," Sarah Beth said, waving to them to sit. She hurried to the kitchen. "She has such an old lady's voice," Deborah whispered. "Yeah, I know," Corky whispered back. "She looked surprised to see us, but not that surprised," she added, her eyes on the doorway to the kitchen. "She didn't even ask us why we want to know about Sarah Fear," Deborah whispered. Deborah edged past the armchairs and sat down on the edge of the couch, sinking into the plush cushion. Corky tried to make her way to the other side of the couch, but she accidentally bumped the coffee table with her leg, sending a tall stack of files toppling to the carpet. "Nice move, Ace," Deborah joked. She tried to get up to help Corky pick up the files, but the low, soft cushion made it difficult for her to stand. Corky dropped to her knees and began hurriedly to pile the manila files back on the table. A bunch of envelopes fell out from one of the folders. She scooped them up and started to replace them, and then stopped. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Deborah, look," she gasped. "What is it?" Deborah asked. "These envelopes," Corky said, her voice trembling. "They're all addressed to Sarah Fear." Chapter 18. Sarah Fear? Deborah grabbed an envelope from Corky's hand and pulled it close to study it. "But this letter was postmarked only a few weeks ago?" she exclaimed. Corky glanced nervously to the doorway. "Do you think Sarah Beth Plummer is really Sarah Fear?" she whispered, frantically stuffing the envelopes back into the folder. "You mean, is she over 100? Deborah asked. "The furniture is all so old," Corky remarked. "Sarah Fear would feel comfortable in this room." "I'm back." Sarah Beth reappeared, carrying a cup of steaming coffee. She stopped just past the doorway. "Corky, what are you doing down there?" I accidentally knocked some stuff over," Corky confessed, staring hard at Sarah Beth. "Oh, don't worry about it," Sarah Beth said, moving toward one of the armchairs. "This place is a mess. I'll pick it all up later." Sarah Beth," Corky started. She held up one of the envelopes. "I couldn't help but see. These letters? They're all addressed to Sarah Fear." Sarah Beth's eyes narrowed for a brief second, but she quickly resumed her friendly expression. "I know," she told Corky, "but—" Sarah Beth lowered herself carefully into the big armchair, sinking deep into the cushion, resting the coffee mug on a padded arm. She sighed. "Well, I guess you know my secret. I'm a Fear." Corky gasped. Sarah Beth laughed. "It isn't that terrible. It doesn't mean I'm some kind of demon, you know." She seems to find Corky's reaction very amusing. Corky climbed to her feet and joined Deborah on the couch. "So your real name is Sarah Fear?" she asked. staring into Sarah Beth's eyes as if trying to read her mind. Sarah Beth nodded. I don't use it. Most of the time I use my mother's maiden name, Plummer. She took a sip of coffee. The fear name is such a curse. What do you mean? Corky asked, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Your reaction said it best, Sarah Beth replied, smiling. When I said I was a fear, you practically fainted on the floor. All three of them laughed. I was just surprised, Corky explained. Surprised and horrified, Sarah Beth added. Everyone in Shadyside knows that the Fear family is filled with weirdos and monsters. The name is a curse. All the amusement drained from her face. She took a long sip of coffee. A curse. Are you related to the first Sarah Fear? Deborah asked. Are you named after her? I'm related to her somehow, Sarah Beth replied. I don't know if my parents named me after her or not. I don't think so. She reached up with her free hand and pulled a towel off her head. Her black hair, still wet, fell down around her face. She tossed a towel over the chair. I've spent my whole life trying to get away from that dreadful name, she said with emotion. Fear. She made a disgusted face. But it's funny. I find myself drawn to the story of the Fears. I'm fascinated by my ancestors, drawn to them, pulled to them as if by an invisible force. When we talked the last time, Corky started, across the street, at the restaurant, I didn't tell you everything, Sarah Beth interrupted. I confess. Her dark eyes burned into Corky's. I didn't reveal everything I know about Sarah Fear. I just didn't want to. She paused, and then her expression hardened, and she added, I really don't want to now. Corky recoiled at the young woman's sudden coolness. She glanced at Deborah, who was staring intently at Sarah Beth. We really need your help, Corky said, her voice cracking with emotion. My sister and my friends, Bobby and Chip and Jennifer, they've all lost their lives, and I don't know. Maybe I'm next. Surprise registered on Sarah Beth's face. She set her cup down on a carpet at her feet. Something evil killed Bobby and Chip, Corky continued. Something evil from beyond this world, and we think it has something to do with Sarah Fear. That's why we have to find out all we can about Sarah Fear, Deborah said, shifting her weight on the couch. We need to know everything you know so that maybe we can stop this evil. Sarah Beth stared at Deborah as if seeing her for the first time. I don't understand, she said finally. I really don't think my dredging up ancient history will do you any good. Please, Corky cried, not intending to sound so shrill, so desperate. Please, Sarah Beth, please help us. Please tell us what you know. Sarah Beth raised both hands as if surrendering at gunpoint. Okay, I'll talk, she cried. Don't shoot. First, tell us what you and John Daly were doing in the cemetery the other night, Corky said. The words just burst out of her. She hadn't really intended to ask that question till later. Sarah Beth acted surprised. You were there? She asked Corky. In the cemetery? No, just driving by, Corky explained. Sarah Beth blushed. She took a deep breath. I didn't think anyone saw us. She stared at Corky. She's stalling, Corky thought. She's thinking fast, trying to think of a good lie. I saw you dance, Corky said, staring back at Sarah Beth, challenging her with her eyes. Sarah Beth chuckled and shook her head. It was all so silly. Silly? Corky asked. She was determined not to let Sarah Beth off the hook. I've known John for years, Sarah Beth said, her cheeks still pink. We were in school together. We even dated for a while, but I lost touch with him. When he called me a few weeks ago, I was really surprised. He called you? Corky asked. Sarah Beth picked up the coffee cup and took a long sip. Yeah, out of the blue. He was really pumped. Sounded a little crazy to me. But John was never exactly what you'd call calm. What did he want? Deborah asked, tucking her legs under her. He wanted me to meet him in the Fear Street Cemetery, Sarah Beth replied, reaching up and fluffing her still damp hair. John knows that I'm a fear, and he knows about my interest in my ancestors, and my interest in spirits and the occult. She finished her coffee and set her cup back down on the carpet. So I met him at the cemetery, she continued. He was definitely acting weird. I mean, really weird, even for John. As soon as I got there, he started asking me if I knew the truth about his sister, Jennifer. I really didn't know what he was talking about. Corky stared intently at Sarah Beth, listening, studying her eyes. I don't think she's telling us the truth, Corky thought. There's something wrong with this story. Then John started asking me if I believed in evil spirits. I told him I believe in all kinds of things, but that didn't seem to satisfy him. He knew I studied the occult and the spirit world. He asked me if I knew how to summon spirits from the grave. At first, I just laughed at him. I thought he was kidding me. She shook her wet hair. Are you two okay? Do you think it's too warm in here? I could turn down the heat. No, we're fine, Deborah replied quickly. Please, go on. Well, I didn't really want him to continue, but John was so insistent. He was really out of his head. I told him I'd read about a dance you do on someone's grave to summon the dead person's spirit. He demanded that I show it to him. I felt ridiculous, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. So I showed him a little bit of the dance. Actually, I made up most of it. I don't really know it. She turns to Corky. I guess that's when you drove by. But you seems to be really into it, Corky thought skeptically. You didn't act like it was some kind of goof, Sarah Beth. You looked really serious to me. Then what happened? Corky asked. Nothing, Sarah Beth replied with a shrug. Nothing happened. No spirit appeared. Big surprise, huh? I thought John would be disappointed, but he looked very pleased, really happy for some reason. Then we said good night and went our separate ways. I haven't seen or heard from him since. Something's wrong here, Corky thought. There's something wrong with this story. What a strange guy, Sarah Beth said thoughtfully. He's scary, I think, really scary. The room grew silent. A clock somewhere in the back started to chime. Corky glanced at her watch. 9 o'clock. Sure I can't get you some coffee? Sarah Beth offered. It's all made. No thanks, the two girls said, again in unison. Then I guess I'll tell you about Sarah Fear, Sarah Beth said, stifling a yawn. That's why you've come, right? Yes, we really need to know about her, Corky said, studying Sarah Beth's face. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed, Sarah Beth told them. I don't know all that much. Most of it I got from old newspapers and what few family records I could find. One of Sarah's cousins, Ben Fear, kept a journal. That was helpful up to a point, but believe me, there are a lot of gaps in the story, a lot of gaps. She tucked her legs beneath her on a big chair, leaned on one of the overstuffed arms, and began to talk, moving her eyes from Corky to Deborah, then staring down at the dark carpet as she spoke. I guess I'll begin with Sarah's death, or I should say, near death. That would be in, 1899, I guess. Up to that point, I think you could say that Sarah managed to escape the curse of the Fears, meaning she had had a fairly happy life. In his journal, Ben Fear described her as a lovely flower of a young woman. That's the way Ben wrote. He was pretty flowery himself. But I guess it can be said that Sarah was beautiful in every way. She was a lovely young woman, kind, generous, and loving. I'm starting to sound like Ben Fear, Sarah Beth muttered, rolling her eyes. Oh well, bear with me. According to family records, Sarah was happily married, for a brief time anyway. She never had any children. She and her husband lived close to Simon Fear's mansion. Their house was always filled with people, cousins, friends, servants. It was quite a life. And it didn't change much. Even after Sarah's husband died of pneumonia, she mourned him for an entire year. Then she resumed her busy, people-filled life. Then in early 1899, the good life abruptly came to an end. Poor Sarah fell ill, deathly ill. I don't really know what the sickness was. Perhaps no one back then knew either. In his journal, Ben Fear described it as a wasting disease. Old Ben had a way with words, didn't he? Well, the doctors gave up on Sarah. She was given up for dead. In fact, a grave was dug in preparation in the Fear Street Cemetery, and a minister was called upon and told to prepare a funeral ceremony. But then there was some kind of miracle. To everyone's surprise, Sarah Fear didn't die. In fact, she made a remarkably fast recovery. Her strength seems to return overnight, and despite the pleas of her family to rest and regain her energy, she pulled herself out of bed the very next day and returned to her duties of running the house. Here's where the story gets strange. After her illness, Sarah changed. She wasn't the same sweet flower anymore. According to Ben Fear's journal, she became withdrawn, reclusive. She developed a terrible temper and was known to throw tantrums for no apparent reason. She turned away from all of her friends. The details in the diary became sketchier and sketchier toward the end of her life. My theory is that Ben Fear was no longer invited to Sarah's house, and so he had little first-hand information about her to write in his journal. He did tell of rumors that Sarah and a servant had become lovers. There were reports of strange gatherings in her house, late-night meetings, seances, wild parties. The police reports are very discreet. Don't forget, Simon Fear was still around, still a powerful figure in the town. Nevertheless, the scandalous stories about Sarah began to spread. The newspaper became full of frightening stories about the events that took place at Sarah's house. One spring day, a kitchen maid was found murdered in the garden, stabbed through the heart with an enormous pair of head shears. A houseguest was also murdered, his leg severed, cleanly cut off his body, and found lying beside him on the floor of the stable. Sarah Fear was never under suspicion for these murders, and the mysteries were never solved. Then came the biggest and most tragic mystery of them all, the pleasure boat trip. Sarah Fear's final trip. It took place on Fear Lake. You know, tranquil, flat Fear Lake, the tiny round lake behind the Fear Street woods. There were 5 people on the boat. Sarah Fear, 3 of her relatives, and 1 servant. According to the newspaper report, it was a beautiful summer day, a perfect day. No clouds, no wind. Sarah's large pleasure boat sailed away from the shore, and a few minutes later it happened, from out of nowhere, a mysterious hurricane-force gale, totally unexpected, on a calmest, most beautiful day of the summer, a wind so powerful that it capsized a large boat, turned it over in a flash, and everyone drowned, everyone, including Sarah Fear, within view of shore, only a 5 or 10 minute swim at most, and yet all on board Sarah's boat were drowned. There were no survivors. Which brings us to the strangest part of all, Sarah Beth said, leaning forward in her big chair, staring at the 2 girls across from her on a couch, lowering her voice to just above a whisper. The strangest part of all. When the bodies were pulled ashore, their skin was bright red, blistered, and scalding hot, as if Sarah and her companions had all drowned in boiling water. Chapter 19. Drive around, Corky said. I don't feel like going in just yet. Let's park and talk, Deborah said. She pulled the car halfway out Corky's driveway and cut the lights and the engine. Corky turned her eyes to the house. The lamp over the door cast a yellow triangle of light on the front porch. All the other lights were out. Her parents were either in the back or had gone to bed early. Did you get the feeling that Sarah Beth was holding something back? Deborah asked, tapping her gloved hands on the steering wheel. Corky slid down low in the passenger seat, raising her knees to the dashboard. Yeah, I think she knows more than she let on, she agreed, but I don't know what it would be. I asked her if she thought Sarah Fear had been possessed by an evil spirit, Deborah said. She just looked at me as if I were from Mars or something. She wouldn't answer any of my questions either, Corky complained. You heard me when I asked what happened to the servant who was supposed to be her lover, and all she could say was that Sarah Fear's secrets were buried with her? Deborah sighed and rubbed her glove against the side window, which was starting to steam up. Weird lady, she said quietly. They had left Sarah Beth's house a little after 10 o'clock, their heads spinning with the bizarre details of the story she had related to them. I hope I've been helpful, Sarah Beth had said, as she walked them to the door. If I come across anything else, I'll get in touch with you. But Corky and Deborah left with more doubts and suspicions than when they had arrived. They had driven the short distance back to Corky's house in silence, each going over in her mind what she had heard, and now they sat in Corky's driveway as the car windows steamed up around them, eager to share their thoughts. It's just too perfect, Deborah said, squeezing the steering wheel with both hands. She's telling us about Sarah Fear, and her name is Sarah Fear? It's too perfect and too strange. They died in scalding hot water, Corky said thoughtfully, closing her eyes. That's how my sister died, in the shower, in scalding hot water. I know, Deborah said in a whisper, staring straight ahead. And remember the tea kettle? That afternoon when I scalded my hand? Corky cried, her mouth dropping open in horror as a memory flew back to her. Again, scalding hot water. I remember, Deborah said, putting a hand on Corky's trembling shoulder. You're right. Hot water is a clue. It's definitely a clue. But a clue to what? Corky asked shrilly, feeling her frustration build. A clue to what? What about those gross murders at Sarah Fear's house? Deborah asked, turning in her seat to face Corky. The house guest with his leg cut clean off, just like Chip's hand? Corky swallowed hard. I hadn't thought about that, Deb, but you're right. The 2 girls sat silent for a long moment, staring at the steamed-up windshield. So, what are we proving? Deborah asked finally. Well, Corky thought hard. I guess we're proving that it's the same evil spirit doing the same horrible things, then and now. And how does that help us? Deborah demanded, staring intently at Corky. Corky shrugged. I don't know. She shook her head unhappily. I just don't. There has to be another clue in the Sarah Fear story, Deborah insisted, her features tight with concentration. There has to be a clue about how to defeat the evil spirit. Somehow the spirit ended up in Sarah Fear's grave. We know that. Somehow it was forced to stay down there for 100 years. But how? How did Sarah Fear defeat it? She didn't, Corky said dryly. She didn't defeat it. It killed Sarah Fear, remember? Oh, yeah? Deborah said softly. They lapsed into silence again. Now, 100 years later, more death, Corky said, staring at the clouded windshield. Jennifer, Bobby, Chip. A loud sob escaped her throat. I wonder who'll be next, Deborah muttered, her eyes dark with fear. Corky's parents were watching TV in the den and back. Pulling off her coat, she went in to say hi to them. They were engrossed in some cop show, and she could see that they didn't want to chat. So Corky said goodnight and headed up to her room. She didn't feel like talking to anyone. Her head felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, weighted down by all she had heard and by her confused thoughts and theories. If only we could trust Sarah Beth Plummer, she thought, starting to pull off her clothes and get ready for bed. But I know we can't trust her. For all we know, Sarah Beth herself could be the evil spirit. If only we could trust somebody. She pulled on a long nightshirt and deposited her clothes in a neat pile on a chair across from her bed. Deborah and Kimmy and I, we're all alone, Corky thought. We're all alone against this ancient evil force. We're the only ones who know about it, the only ones who believe in it. And what can the three of us do? What? I don't know what to think, she told herself, heading to the bathroom across the hall to brush her teeth. We shouldn't have gone to Sarah Beth's. Now I'm even more confused than before, and more frightened. She had just started to put toothpaste on the brush when she heard her phone ringing. Dropping the toothbrush into the sink, she dashed back into her room and picked up the receiver. Hello? Hi, Corky. It's me, Kimmy. Kimmy, Corky cried in surprise. Hey, how are you feeling? Better, I guess, Kimmy replied uncertainly. My temperature is down, but I didn't call about that. She sounded breathless, excited. What's happening? Corky said. Did you hear about John Daly? Kimmy asked, nearly squeaking the words. What about John? Corky demanded. Did they find him? Yeah, they found him all right, Kimmy replied. They found him in Fear Lake. Drowned.